Hey guys, Matt Driver here, 5x3 Fishing. Today we're going to talk about line breakage. Everybody always has a story about when they go out there fishing a tournament. Man, I had the winning fish, set the hook, broke him off. And I hear that more and more often. And of course, with 5x3, we're always about no excuses. And we're always coming up with solutions. So, why is it that we have line breakage? It can be many different things. Everybody likes to blame a certain manufacturer, and there are some lines out there that are inferior. It's just going to happen. It just all depends on how the line is stored, how long you've had it. So many factors go into it. The type knot you tie in your line, and we could go on and on about excuses and factors. But today what I want to do is talk about what we can do to increase our fish catches with less line breakage. Alright guys, one of the first things we're going to talk about is why does line break? You grab line, you say this is really strong, I've got some line right here, this is only a 6-pound test line, and I can yank on it, and I can slowly pull on it as hard as I can, and even with it being 6-pound test, I can't break it. But, to show you a little trick here, if we take this line, like I said, this is a 6-pound test, I'm just going to tie an overhand knot in it. It's so small, I can't even hardly see it here. Alright, I'm just tying an overhand knot. Not sure if you'll be able to see the knot right here, but I'm going to tie that knot. Alright, I'm going to cinch that knot closed real softly. Then I'm going to do the same pull, and notice how easy that line breaks. So, where is your weakest point in that line? Typically it's going to be in the knot. So we want to make sure that that knot is well taken care of. Make sure that we cinch it down slowly. Make sure that we tie our proper knot. Of course, for me, a Palomar knot is probably the best knot out there. Like I said, everybody has their opinions, but that knot is going to be your weakest point typically. Alright, next what we're going to do is talk about what baits do we break off on mostly. And I'd be willing to bet, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, that when you break off, it's typically going to be on the hook set or shortly thereafter. And, it's typically on baits such as a jig or something you're pitching or flipping or dragging along. And the main reason is you're throwing that bait into heavy cover or around rocks or different things, dragging it on the bottom, and of course, like this jig here, if it's hitting on the bottom, it's on your line constantly. So your first foot of your line is going to be pretty scarred up. That could be one cause, but what I see the main mistake I see people making is when I'm gonna step back here and say we're flipping a jig, and you fish with this guy, and every time he does it, you get a bite and you go on point. First thing you do, and you see guys lower that rod tip and really pop it back, and when they lower that rod tip they put slack in the line. There's two things that's wrong with that. When you lower that slack in that line and you have a jig tied on, that fish has that jig in its mouth. When you lower that slack on that line, that fish will feel it, and several times, lots of times it'll just spit it out. So, when you go down and you feel that fish bite, if you load that rod up and you lean into it or you reel down, kind of old school, that's kind of the way I was taught by my grandfather, reel down on it and set the hook, you don't have to do that. Nowadays hooks are extremely sharp. If you'll just, as soon as you feel that bite, maintain that exact tension on your bait. If your rod's way up here, you may have to bring a little line up to get the hook set. But what you don't want to do is lower and put a lot of slack in that line, because when you do, it shock loads the line, and that's where you lose a lot of fish. You set the hook, it just comes back, and you're like, what happened? Well, first thing you do is we blame the line, and when many times it's just us that forgot to retie, or we shock loaded that line. So, best thing to do, you pitch the bait out there, you get the bite, keep that rod maintained where it's at, and just load the rod up and then lean back into the fish. A lot of times you're going to lose a lot less fish doing that, and you're going to break off a whole lot less. Alright, next thing we're going to talk about is what baits do we break off the least on, and why do we never break off on those baits? Like I was talking earlier, any bait that you're going to allow it to get slack and you're going to shock load that line, that's typically when you're going to get your break off. So what baits do we break off the least on? Baits like spinner baits, jerk baits, your soft plastic swim baits, those are all baits that we don't break off as much as we do if we're flipping or pitching or using a soft plastic on the bottom. And the reason why is as we're reeling that bait along, we're sitting back here and we're reeling, that rod is continuously loaded up, and what we want is that rod to load, and then what we typically do is just do a sweep hook set. I mean, you can really set the hook hard on it, and still not break it, but you've taken up a lot of that slack and a lot of that tension, so you don't have that shock load. And same thing with crankbaits. You know, if you're going to lose a fish on a crankbait, typically he's going to sling the bait because of the leverage a crankbait has, or you're going to lose him at the boat, that if he makes a run and shock loads that line right there at the boat. So ultimately that's what we want to do, is we want to keep that tension on the line. And I'm not saying tighten it all the way up and then do it. Just keep doing what you're doing, let that fish bite. Same thing, whether it be an Alabama rig, whether it be a swim bait, anything that you're reeling, crankbait, that rod loads up, and then we do a sweep and we set the hook. And like I said, you can put the coal to it. Typically you're not going to break it off. And you know, I never can express enough that retying is critical no matter what. All we're doing is we want to cut down on the excuses that we have and on why we're breaking off, and instead of saying this is terrible equipment, spending thousands of dollars trying to upgrade and change what you're doing with product, you know, you might want to look at the source of why you're breaking off. Like I said, everything that I'm telling you is my opinion. It's the stuff that I've had to grow and do to improve my fish catches. And like I said, all I'm wanting to do is pass it on to you. And if y'all have any ideas, anything that you do to increase your fish catches and your line breakage, you know, decrease your line breakage, please let us know. Like I said, we're open for suggestions, and we would like to give you that credit and share with everybody else. So guys, thanks for watching. We're going to have another installment online in the near future, so we'll see you then.